I went to a family wedding a couple years ago, and there was a photography gimmick there, and it was an empty picture frame in which people were invited to take group shots or individual shots, moving it around. And my cousin and my aunt and I took such a shot, and it's on my Facebook page. It's one of those pictures that, by some paradigm I don't understand, just keeps showing up and showing up and showing up. So I see it a lot. And every time I do, I think, wow, it's interesting to see who looks like they really feel like they belong in that picture and who looks like they're kind of moving out of the edge of the frame. In this moment, my friends, as we are facing what may be one of the most important elections of our time this week, our society is having a heart-rending debate about who belongs in that picture and who does not. Who is worthy of being included in the portrait gallery, and when it's better to just leave an empty frame. We have been debating this since before the founding of our nation, and it's in our identity papers as a nation to think little signs of who we thought then would count as a citizen, or who would have a vote, or who would even count as a full human being. And since those days, the voices of our Unitarian and Universalist ancestors have been part of that debate, and they have pushed us to the front, sometimes reluctantly and without skills, but to the front of the welcoming line. In the past few decades, we have put more pictures on the walls. The talents of women, of people of color, and gay people have been recognized. And Dr. Tanya Cargill is the curator of painting and sculpture at the National Portrait Gallery, and I had a chance to hear her speak at Chautauqua Institute last summer, and she was speaking about U.S. identity. Her job is to curate the collection in the National Portrait Gallery and to decide, as she puts it, how the personal translates into the communal. We have, she said last summer, a new identity crisis. And the months that have passed since I heard her words have only made them seem more prophetic. Last summer, her comments seemed relevant and true. But today, this question about who should be in our collective gallery, who should have the right to be a frame on our walls, has become sinister and scary. And my friends, I'm going to ask us to think together about some of the events of the last months. I understand it is hard to do this, but as Reverend Neal said, one of the tactics that's being used is to give us so much to think about that we can't think about anything. So I ask us this morning to think about our Jewish kin and the attack on the Tree of Life congregation and the loss of life, possibility, and a sense of safety, even as this week will mark the 80th anniversary of Kristallnacht, the Nazi pogrom, 2 nights in which more than 90 people were killed in attacks on homes and places of worship. A few days before the attack on Tree of Life, 2 black elders were killed while grocery shopping in Kentucky. And the video footage of a nearby church suggests that this was actually a failed attempt to do another shooting in another house of worship. 2 weeks ago, the Trump administration's plans to erase any reference to, any acknowledgement of the existence of transgender people was exposed in the release of a memo. And it caused a feeling of erasure for so many who are beloved among us. A few weeks before that, our Congress voted onto the U.S. Supreme Court for life a man who had been credibly charged with sexual assault. The Trump administration is right at this moment sending 5,000 troops to the border to meet a caravan of Honduran asylum seekers. This administration is also quietly preparing rules which will allow them to detain migrant families, including children, indefinitely. And we know, and I know it's hard to hold, but there are attacks on health programs and other forms of assistance that have had a disproportionate impact on the disabled who continue to have their life threatened by those who might see them or their lives as burdensome. So among us, my friends, there are people who are beyond scared, beyond terrified, and they are the people we must offer sanctuary to. When we say we, who do we mean? Cargill asked last summer. She said, identities are fluid and broad. It's a grounding force identity. It tells us who we are, and it also creates how we relate to one another. In her job, Cargill is the curator of the National Gallery Portrait Gallery, which was started in 1962, the year I was born. And Cargill, who is Puerto Rican, has been brought in to address the issue within that gallery. It has 22,000 objects. Those of you that are numbers people, this is your moment. 22,000 objects, 25% of which represent famous women in our history. 5% represent famous African Americans. 2% represent Asian or Native Americans, and less than 0.1% represent Latino-Latina artists or subjects, despite the fact that Hispanics are now the second largest group in this nation's population. The American national myth is deeply rooted in the myth of individuality, Cargill said. The idea that no matter who you are, you can have an impact. And yet, we have seen attack on us as if to disempower those of us so that we will not believe we can have an impact. And when the results of Tuesday's elections are in, and we will wish for the best possible results, but what we will know and what will not change is that we cannot unknow the extent of hatred and resentment that is out there, that many are experiencing in their daily life in the form of aggressive acts against them, small and large. Others of us are just coming to understand this, but we cannot unknow that. And I want to talk for us a little bit about ourselves for a minute here. Our association's identity has its own mythical context. The Reverend Dr. Mark Morrison Reed, who is a prominent African-American historian among us, said, 4 decades have passed since the controversy over black empowerment nearly tore the Unitarian Universalist Association apart. And even now, UUs remain unreconciled over what for many was a life-defining fight. The money that is being raised and so generously matched by the Polgars today is in direct response to that history. We cannot undo our mistakes, but we can, when we can, make amends. This congregation's justice work was rooted in that civil rights time, and the Reverend Aaron Gilmartin was a great crusader for racial and human rights. And it was continued by the Reverend David Sammons, who served this congregation for more than 2 decades and who I am privileged to call a mentor and a friend. Both of their portraits hang at the end of our owl room. But as our intern minister last year, Natalie Malter, pointed out, fewer of us have heard the names of Reverend George Johnson or Reverend Harold Wilson. Reverend Johnson and Wilson were black ministers who served as associates along with Gilmartin in the late 1960s and early 70s. Like Gilmartin, Johnson and Wilson were talented and courageous ministers who worked tirelessly for civil rights within the Unitarian Universalist movement and American society as large. But unlike Gilmartin, Natalie wrote last year, their names are not publicly commemorated anywhere on our church grounds, and there are others who served among us who go equally unrecognized. In other words, my friends, we too have empty frames, and that is our work, to look at ourselves and what we can do. I need to say that last night we had a beautiful and wonderful occasion, which was our Bid for Love auction, and it was just joyous to have that celebration. And in the course of that evening, a member who is beloved among us, beloved, though she has not been with us long, suffered the deep pain of misgendering more than one time, having people mistakenly use the wrong pronouns and not recognize the mistake that they had made. For a member of the transgender community, this is a deep wound. This is not a slight or an insult. It is a pain. And that happened here despite intention. So my friends, we too have work to do. When a tragedy occurs like the ones that have happened to us over and over in the last months, we mourn not only for the victims, not only for the possibility lost, not only for the damage to our vision of who we are. In these times, it seems sometimes as if we're not so much pushing a proactive agenda as simply trying to reduce harm. We are not so much trying in these days to fulfill that charge that our religious ancestors gave us to literally build heaven on earth. We are simply trying to reduce the impact on individuals who have days when they feel as if they're subject to hell on this earth in this life. And I know it's hard not to look away. And yet we need to see the violence, oppression, despair, isolation, and grief that have been the history of too many who are being marginalized in front of us. We need to have the wisdom and the courage and the bravery to imagine a different frame, a different frame. In these times, it matters. When we show up at a vigil like the one last Tuesday, and I'm so grateful that Reverend Neil was also there to represent us. When we make the commitment to have gender-neutral bathrooms, or to struggle with what for some of us is the awkwardness of using pronouns. When we post our Black Lives Matter signs on both ends of our campus. When we are willing to take accompaniment training so that we can do respectful work with our immigrant neighbors. When we are willing to write that check or text that amount, to participate in righting centuries of wrong, and give a separate space to those Unitarian Universalists of African descent who still need that healing place that Black Lives UU offers to them. I know, because you tell me, many of you, or you tell other people who tell me, that some of you wish that we would stop talking about these issues of race and difference, who matters and who is erased. And I need to tell you, my friends, that I cannot. For if I were to do that, I would literally be neglecting one of the great moral challenges of our times. For it is truly only by seeing the entirety of the human experience that we can actually try on that different frame. The one in which we understand that we are not perfect, but we are enough in our willingness to keep trying to get it right. The one in which we are not sure anymore what safety is, but we know we are willing to work to provide sanctuary and support and witness to those who need it. A world in which we know that hate has extended its reach in ways we could not have imagined possible. And it may seem as if that reach is too great, but we will also reach out and extend the reach of love. In this way, we make a difference through our daily small actions, our individual choices. This week is a week in which we as a nation will take a poll as to whose frames we choose to honor and whose pictures we choose to erase or even to smash. This week, as you go about your business, as you go about your voting, if you haven't yet done it, think about also just taking the time to meet the eyes of someone from whom you might otherwise look away. Or just talking to somebody who sees the expansion of rights of others as a threat to themselves. Or if you see the expansion of rights of others as a threat to you, Challenge yourself and talk to someone else about why that is true for you. Reach out to someone you haven't spoken with for a while who might be particularly struggling. Reach out to someone who is a young person, because I cannot tell you how much pain our young people are carrying. I cannot tell you. Check out the social justice table if you haven't voted for our UU voter guide. Write a check so that we can match it with the generous gift of the Polgars. Spend tonight doing research on your own voting, or if you've already voted, calling someone younger than you and encouraging them to reach through their despair and to vote. In these ways, we can become a place of sanctuary. Not a place of perfect safety where we always do the right thing, but a place where we try to do that deep spiritual work of living into our aspirations. It is our deep wish that no evil may cross this door. It is our deep wish that we offer this holy place to all who enter it, and that we affirm their holiness and their beauty as they do. May this be a place that hangs a bigger frame, a newer frame, a frame so enormous that every piece of the glorious resplendence of our diversity will fit within it. May this be a place which tries to live out our values, that can say ouch when we are hurt and oops when we make a mistake, despite our best intentions. May this be the place that understands that my liberation is bound up with your liberation, and that none of us are free until all of us are free. So I will end today with the words I first said in November of 2016. They are much truer today and more important today than we could have ever known back then. Resist despair. Interrupt hate. Make your life part of that heart of love. Live, love, and offer possibility. Commit for the long haul. And let us be the keepers of that far horizon where the frame will be wide enough to hold all of us. In this brave space, may we never forget our commitment to be some of the ones who help to make it so.